Developing the Leader Within podcast, leading beyond limits.
Welcome back, everyone. If you haven't subscribed, please do so right now, as it will help get our show to others and help us reach our next milestone. Today, I'm excited to be speaking with Shelly Starks. Shelly is the CEO, president of Inline Consulting Services, Inc., a woman-owned and operated managing general agency specializing in niche, high-impact employee health benefits solutions. She develops leaders capable of driving operational excellence by enhancing their strategic thinking, decision making, communication, and time management for team leadership skills. Shelly, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Enrique.
Well, I'm happy to have you. And folks, we will be speaking about strategy to execution, how great leaders drive operational excellence. But before we get into that conversation, Shelly, tell us a little bit about you that maybe the audience may not know.
Well, I appreciate that introduction. I have actually been in multiple businesses throughout my career. If you were to take a peek at my LinkedIn, you'd see, wow, she's done a lot of different things. And I like to coin that as a multipreneur, somebody who just has that entrepreneur spirit and really wants to get out and make an impact and leave a legacy in some way, whether that is in one field of expertise or in multiple fields of expertise. That's something that I've always had as a passion. And really, it all boils down for me to communication, and it boils down to bridging the gap for leaders. And I have one business that actually, yeah, you mentioned the managing general agency, but I also have a coaching business that I like to help those executive leaders understand how to communicate with their people better. And I love that your show really focuses on the leadership side of things and also strategy around how to not just be a good leader, but also grow a business while you are stepping into those shoes that might be bigger than you're ready to fill.
Very critical things to be focused on, and thank you for your work in those areas. Now, Shelly, as the CEO of Inline Consulting Services, what pivotal moments in your career shaped the way you lead today, and how have those experiences influenced your approach to developing other leaders?
Well, I think it starts with finding mentors that you trust and that you would literally take any piece of advice they gave you in business and run with it. That's not an easy feat. I understand that. So people could say, well, how do I find, a mentor like that? And part of it is really just being willing to be vulnerable out there and asking questions instead of being the smartest person in the room, putting yourself in the room with smart people and not being the smartest person in the room, surrounding yourself with people who have been more successful than you. And it doesn't matter if it's in your field or not. Business equates to all different areas of different types of businesses. That strategy could work for, manufacturing. It could work for a coaching business. It can work for anything that you're trying to go out there for. And so, I always looked at my mentors as people who could pour into me. And Enrique, it was so funny because I remember the time when I realized that I was the mentor. And I didn't feel like I was old enough for that yet, that I'd had enough wisdom there to really pour into someone else. But really, our job as leaders, our only job as leaders, is not your day to day, day in and day out tasks. It's to build new leaders. And so if you think about it that way, and you are always going to have mentors in your space, I have mentors in my space still, because I feel like it's important that they bring a certain level of wisdom to the questions that I ask, and then not be afraid to ask questions to feel like you're asking things that you should probably already know. That's where the trust factor comes in with a mentor. So for me, that was a pivotal moment early on, was for me to find mentors and then later to realize I was the mentor. And taking that and saying, okay, I don't know, I don't have all the answers. I'm not going to try to pretend I have all the answers, but I am going to pour into people the things that I have learned the hard way, unfortunately. And then also to ask their opinion on how things how they would handle those things, because you could be mentoring somebody and they can still pour into you.
Yeah, I've seen that. And mentorship is so critical. As you was talking, I was thinking about one of my mentees. He's 70 years old. And
Right?
sometimes you think, oh my goodness, I can't mentor somebody that's 20
Older.
years
Uh-huh.
older than I am.
Yeah.
But my philosophy around mentorship is always have one below, one at your next level, and then one at your dream spot, right? So if you
I
can
like it.
navigate those four people into your trajectory, your journey, I think it'll make it a whole lot easier. But both you and I know how critical mentors are to our success. Now, a lot of it is that conversation around strategy. How do you get there? How do you take what you have and what they have to give and kind of mend them together? And you specialize in helping leaders enhance their strategic thinking. What are some practical ways leaders can shift from reactive decision making to a more proactive, strategic mindset, especially in high stakes industries like employee health benefits?
Well, one of the things that I learned the hard way, we can talk about that a little bit more later, but learning some things the hard way, they sting, and you tend to come back to those more, consciously than maybe the unintentional things that just went your way or didn't go your way. And when I use the word intentional on purpose, because, being successful and having that strategic thought process has to be an intentional action. It's a behavior of a leader that requires you to do things in advance. A lot of leaders are naturally good at things. They just show up and things happen and they get decisions made quickly and they can guide people on the fly, but not every part of your business needs to be an on the fly and, to your point, reactive response. Because when you're leading a group of people, or even if you're not leading anyone but online, you're technically leading. If you're going out there without that strategic thought process and you're not really giving it thought ahead of time so that you have some kind of core foundation that you're going to lean on. I use the term North Star. When a business owner comes to me or we have a discussion around, I just feel like my team is not following me, or not, we're flailing, or we're really struggling in these areas. My very first thing that I do about that strategic thought process is, where are you heading? What is it that you're going for as an organization? Sometimes, to your point, we talked about this before the show started, sometimes, to your point, they might have put something on paper, but they've not put a plan of action into place to execute that plan, and they haven't held themselves accountable to the plan, to the strategy, to whatever it is that is moving the needle for the business. Unfortunately, sometimes you have people that flail and they don't understand why they're flailing over there and they're not being successful, and then they give up. It doesn't mean they're not a good leader. It means that they just didn't put that strategy in place and put a mentor in place to help them develop that strategy. And then you have other people who are wildly successful without really knowing why they got to that wild success. And they think that the patterns and the behaviors they're doing now are what got them to that success. But that's not always the case. And so if you don't pull that, cover back and look at all of the ingredients to what's going on in that recipe that you're creating, you might have some very expensive mistakes that come down the road that will be more financially costly for you down the road when you have more success that's happening to your business than you would if you were one of those people who were struggling to get business off the ground.
Absolutely. Now, talking about people, processes, and success, operational excellence often comes down to people and processes. So, what are the key leadership behaviors you've seen that consistently drive high performing teams and sustainable results?
Again, having that North Star and then creating all of your standard operating procedures, all of the things that are really the guidelines for your company. If you don't have them, first of all, that's the first red flag. We need to make sure that we've got some process and procedures in place. That's what a standard operating procedure is. And so if you don't have that, you just need to make sure that's always pointing back to the North Star. Is this driving us to the direction we want to go? The second piece of that to me is communicating what the North Star is to your people. Not one time, not 10 times, not 100 times. Every single day in every decision that you make, am I moving us toward our North Star? Let me give you an example. So anytime that I, start a business and want to grow that business in any way, I make sure that I have a conversation with myself in the morning. And let's say, for instance, right now I'm growing to a business to a $50 million business, right? That's the goal for us to get to in the next 2 years or whatever. When I, get up in the morning and I'm having my coffee or I'm getting ready, I have this conversation with myself. Today, I am the CEO of a $50 million business. I make every decision today like the CEO of a $50 million business. This is not an option. This is a behavior that's helping my psyche understand this is what our North Star is. This is what we're moving towards. And during the day, I have to check in with myself because it gets out of control rolling down the hill. You start out with a list, and at the end of the day, you still have the list because so many things started happening in your business, but you forgot to be on your business. You forgot that I'm the CEO of a $50 million business. Did every decision I make today lead me toward that? Now, if that's not a dollar amount, is not what you want to work towards, that's okay. But if you don't express that and communicate that in a way that the employees understand it in their own behavioral style, you're really going to be missing 2/3 of the equation. Because if you could do it by yourself without those people, you would have done it. But you need them. And in order for them to follow you, you've got to make sure they understand where you're leading them to. And the fact that people follow you if you don't give them a direction is scary, right? You want people to be engaged in your North Star. You want people to be engaged in your goals and have an ownership about that, but it starts with the process. It starts with the strategy, and it starts with you doing that before you ever get in front of anyone else at your company.
And that's a fact. Now, as you was talking, I'm thinking about the many times CEOs or founders or business owners start this process and they do require the help from others, right? It's something that you just can't do by yourself, or you would. And communication is lacking. And I think that most of the time when I'm going through doing surveys or asking questions of people that are in support of the greater mission, most of the time they say communication is lacking, right? And so many leaders struggle with communication and time management as they grow into bigger roles. So, what are the most common pitfalls you see, and what habits or systems can leaders implement immediately to improve in these areas?
Some of the things that I see again is when you get into the day to day, and you have to have an element of trust with the people that you decide to hire. And if you're going to be a micromanaging leader, this is not just going to be exhausting for your people. It is going to be exhausting for you. And it's not possible for you to micromanage them down to the nth degree, because if you could do their job and yours, you wouldn't have hired them. So you've got to find a level of trust within yourself for those people, and you got to give them some room to grow into those roles. But it's important for you to make sure you're nurturing them into those roles. If you hire a salesperson, and the fact that they sold you on hiring them, they should have sold you on hiring them. There's a salesperson, right? That doesn't mean they come with all the tools in their bag to be the best salesperson. Who's the best salesperson at a company? The owner. Because you are the one that has the passion for that business, and you're the one that started it and grew it to a time where you're able to hire other people, get enough revenue to bring other people on to help you grow the business and scale. But if you don't trust those people to come in and bring in their skill set and to figure out how to, but give them bumpers. I call it bumpers. Keep those people in the bumpers. Let them bump around. They got the little rails in the bumpers for, bowling there that you can kind of keep them in the lane. Give them that construct, but let them make some choices. Let them make some decisions. Put some processes in place that requires accountability back to you so that you're not doing that micromanagement piece. When you're micromanaging, you're not doing the things that other people at your company cannot do. The reason they're there is to take the things off that somebody else can do. And the reason you need to have your lane is so that you can do the things nobody else can do in your company.
Yeah, spot on. And folks, if you're all running your company, you didn't listen to that right there, go hit the replay, because it is oftentimes that we are the point of failure in a lot of the things that happen. Typically is around trust, communication, allowing people to do the job you hired them to. And the funny thing, Shelly, is that year after year, I hear the same thing. I don't understand why year after year we're hearing the same thing, the same struggles from CEOs and employees alike, where they don't see that interchange of trust, communication, freedom to do the tasks that they were hired to do. And it's sometimes painful to even hear it another year. And I hope one day we don't have to hear it. It just
I
means
do
that
too.
they've grown.
I was just going to say it's interesting to me because, when it starts with an attitude, in my opinion, your attitude has to be, I believe enough in these people to invest my time to bring them into my business to help me grow us to the North Star. And that's an attitude. And that attitude has to drive you to new behaviors. So the reason we're still back in these same looped, conversations with CEOs is because we've not changed our behavior. You're going to do the same thing over and over again. It's the definition of insanity. And people say this all the time, but they're not understanding what has to happen as a cause and effect to that definition of insanity. There has to be a new behavior. And the only way that you change your belief system is by changing those behaviors and getting different results. You have to keep doing those new behaviors, though, for a period of time before you can get new results. We give up a lot of times because we go to a conference and we get 9,000 things that we write in a notebook, and we're so fired up about it. We come back and, instead of saying, you know what, I'm going to focus on 2 of these for this quarter, come back to my notes and focus on 2 more, we're like, I'm going to implement all of these things at one time. And then those behaviors aren't showing results for you. So you automatically go back because you did it 1, 2, 3 times. You automatically go revert back to your old behavior. So the old behavior is going to give you the same results. We're back in that weird loop again. And, sometimes when when leaders bring me in and we talk about them having the same result with different employees, they're having the exact same result. I look them in the face and say, who's the common denominator? Has this not dawned on you that it might be you? And it's difficult because they don't want to hear that. That's the great part about being a fractionally hired coach, is that they could fire you, but they're hiring you because they clearly are uncomfortable and they need to do something different. So when I'm talking to these leaders, I like to point out, okay, it's you, but we have ways to fix this. But it starts with our attitude of what we want to do and then changing our actual behaviors. If you're not willing to change your behaviors, every coaching call I ever have with you is going to just be a nice to have and not a have to have.
I often say, if you're going to a conference trying to find ideas how to fix others, you've already lost. You've already lost in your endeavor, because you should be going to the conference to sharpen yourself up. And if you're
Absolutely.
having trouble fixing or adjusting people at your job, that's a you issue. And so I hope that most people are going to conferences to refine themselves and how to become better, so that they can become an asset and not a liability when they go back to their jobs. Now, oftentimes we speak to CEOs, founders, business owners, leaders, but a good complement of the listeners are those that are emerging as leaders. And as someone deeply committed to leadership development, what advice would you give to emerging leaders who want to stand out, create impact, and lead with confidence in today's evolving workplace?
One thing that I see on a regular basis is the differences between generations. So, depending on where you are, you could be a young, up and coming leader. You could be an older person that just hasn't gone into leadership until now. There's a lot of different phases of this, right? But what happens a lot of times is we have a perceived need. I'm a behavioral analysis coach, so I do a lot in the communication side, but it's more also in the language of how you communicate, how you problem solve, how you make decisions. So if you are not going to look at somebody from a behavioral standpoint, meaning how do they communicate with me? And then you're only going to put these weird, I don't know, definitions around Gen Z and millennials and like all these different weird buckets that we put out there because we think, oh, the perceived need is my dad was successful and he handled it this way. It was a very harsh, like these are the rules and nobody is able to contribute and if you didn't do that, you got fired. And some people just have these messages because they saw somebody that was successful and so they perceive the need to be that way in order to be successful. We're not doing ourselves any favors when we're not being authentically us. When someone is drawn into your space, they come in and somehow or another they come into your space to be an employee or whatever that is. They're really being drawn into your space because there's an energy exchange in my opinion. And that energy exchange is looking for you to be truthfully who you are. You as a leader, you might not be, an experienced leader yet, but I promise you, if you will show up authentically and care, truly care about what goes on with the people in your organization and not just about your profits or not just about your tasks or whatever it is, you've got to make sure that you're treating them like people, not the numbers that we see on paper. The number one hangup that I have for people is they get a little uptick of success and they think they have to go robotic with their people. It's all about the stats. It's all about the reports. It's all about whatever the performance is. And it is about the performance. But it starts with you being a leader and being authentically showing up for them. If somebody has a sick child, show them some empathy for that. You may not have children because you may be young, but you got put in a leadership role. I promise you the investment in them for you caring is going to go switch over, and then all of a sudden they're going to want to invest in the company and they're going to want to give more of themselves because they feel like they've not been pushed to the limit of just producing a specific number. They now show up because they believe in you as a leader. They show up because they believe in your North Star and where you are heading and that they are contributing to that. But when you shut them down emotionally because you haven't showed up in an authentic way and you go robotic on them, they do the exact same thing. They mirror what you put out. So being conscious of what you're putting out as a leader, and if you're not getting the results that you want when you first start leading, you need to make the changes.
Absolutely. Your conversation reminded me of, and in 26 years in the Navy, I had plenty of leadership examples, but there's one guy that I will never forget because told me, your family did not come in your sea bag. And I said, what? And so
Yeah.
from that point on, that guy, I don't care what rank, he could have been a 4-star admiral. I would have never respected him from that point on. Not because he didn't think that my family situation at the time was not that important, but he negated the
Yeah.
totality of who I was by that one statement. And it actually put into perspective his thoughts around leadership and how he was aiming to lead. And definitely at that point, I decided that not every leader was going to be my leader.
I was just thinking one thing that would be helpful for people that are newly been, going into leadership and people who have been in leadership for a while. Think back to that time when you did. This is a great exercise you just brought up, Enrique. Think back to a time that you had that leader that really made an impact on you, and go back and really think about why they made an impact on you. I promise you it's going to come back to the human element of how they treated you, the things that they decided were important when you had crisis in your life, or to your point, somebody telling you, your family, and it's impossible for us. Why would we separate ourselves? The military has a different agenda, but why would we separate ourselves from the people that are special to us in our lives, whether you're married to them, not married to them, whatever it is, have kids, don't have kids. It could be extended family that's super important to you. And there's just priorities that are there. And so, think back to when you had that moment, or that leader that stepped up for you, and not just did something for you, but truly, was a good leader to you. When I look back and think about that person, because my behavioral style wants to be able to be part of creating things. I, as an entrepreneur, even if I worked for a corporation, I wanted to contribute to the conversation in the room. I didn't want to just be told what to do. Even if they didn't take my idea and run with it, I felt heard and seen if they allowed me to share my contribution to it. And it helped me even more when they did choose to work with my idea and run with it, even if it changed and even if it developed and got, kind of put in a different casing for the culture at that company. It didn't matter. I felt heard and seen, and that was important enough to me to make me want to work harder for that leader. And so when I think back to those leaders that were in my life in those moments, and have done this exercise in the past, it always comes back to how they made me feel. So take that as an exercise and do that with yourself, and just remind yourself as a leader, you have to make hard decisions sometimes, and sometimes the conversations aren't roses. I totally understand that. You have to do hard conversations as a leader. The problem is that we tend to kind of separate ourselves from that human element and just go straight task specific as a leader. These are the things we have to take care of. And we forget the human element. And, if somebody feels like you haven't seen or heard them, they're not going to run to the ends of the earth for you. They're going to do their bare minimum job.
That quiet quitting, right? That
Yep.
they- they're there getting the check
Yep.
and doing what you say, and that's about all you're going to get. Just remember, we can't answer everybody's mail. We can't appease everybody's desire. We can't
Correct.
even we because even leaders have constraints, right? We have abilities, we have guardrails, we have budgets, we have this. But what does it hurt to come back and say, look, I love some of those elements that you shared, and there's some that we can immediately put into play. And actually, thank you for sharing that, because it actually helps us refine this area. But there's some elements on that due to this, that, and the other, we just can't entertain at this time. Not
Yeah.
that they're bad, it's just that at this moment, knowing the climate and trajectory or whatever it may be, constraint, we can't put those into, but I still value that share because I can see down the road where that may come into play. Goodness, I mean, is that difficult?
More importantly, it's just how you say it. It's just literally how you say it. When you validate somebody and say, thank you for your input, even if you didn't like it, just say thank you for your input, because that's their feeling or that's their actual opinion. And whether you care whether somebody has another opinion or not, doesn't matter. You have to show up as a leader. This is not personal, right? Yes, we want you to make your engagement personal, But the things that they say to you, you have to kind of say, okay, this isn't a personal attack, or this isn't you want them to feel like an open door policy. They can come in, you don't know what's happening in their day to day every day. If you're not doing that micromanaging, you're not sure. And there might be one little thing that you can tweak for them if they're willing to share with you where they're struggling. One little thing that will be the key to unlocking a whole nother level of potential for them. One of my mentors, speaking of mentors, and actually I pulled him out of retirement and pulled him into this new business. He's been a mentor of mine for 8 years. And, he actually said to me one day, he said, Shelly, you've got to remember that when somebody is sitting in front of you and you've got the answers, it's a responsibility for you as a leader to share that information. If it dies with you and you were the only person that learned it, what was the point? And to me, that was hugely impactful because we're all about us and what do we gather and the knowledge we get, and that sets us apart from other people and all of that, right? All that competitive. I'm very competitive, so I understand that, wanting to get that competitive edge. When I flipped over and realized I was the mentor, I now have a responsibility. I no longer am in receiving mode. I'm not just in receiving mode, I'm also in giving mode. And if I don't share that information and it dies with me, what was the point?
Yeah, very profound. And actually, the reason I started this podcast was so that nothing dies with me and everybody gets an opportunity at this knowledge through our guests and through the conversation. So thank you for sharing all that. Now, what do you have coming up, and where can the viewer or the listener follow or support you?
Well, LinkedIn is a great place to go for me. It's just Shelly Starks. You can take a look there. We have several different websites, so I won't necessarily list the websites for different business ventures, but I always welcome leaders to reach out, and, we can always get a dialogue going in the messenger on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook as well. So if that, on the business side, if that's another or a better place for you to reach. I just think that, if you are a leader out there that's listening, and, if it's not me, if it's not Enrique, find somebody that you feel like you can lock arms with, that you trust, that can pour into you. And then at some point, stop being the person that's being poured into. At some point, start to pour into your people, or to pour into other people around you. Practice it with your family. I mean, your family's going to be your family no matter what happens, and if you have children, you're leading your children. If you have a family, you're leading your whole family. Like, it doesn't matter. You could be a single mom and not just a dad, and leading your family. So, you show up as a leader and authentically you in a lot of different areas of your life. Just be sure to be conscious of that and intentional about it every single day.
Absolutely. Now, we'll have all the links necessary for you to be able to support Shelly on what she's working on, or if you want to look into her business, we'll make sure that you have that. Now, folks, today's episode is sponsored by the Global Trends Magazine, the Outlier Project, Bone Frog Coffee, Castle and Compass Adventures, Ascend Meditations, Chop AI, Boomcaster, and Superpass. And if you've enjoyed this episode and learned something interesting about the topic covered today, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and let us know by leaving a comment. Tune in next week for another episode where we dissect leadership from another angle. And as we like to end the show, success to you.